When a millionaire collapsed mid-flight, panic spread like wildfire. The flight attendants froze. No doctors responded. And then, from seat 23A, a voice rang out, "I can help." But the voice belonged to a poor 12-year-old black girl named Layla Green, and everyone dismissed her. "Sit down," they said. "Let the adults handle it." No one believed her. But as the man's lips turned blue and the plane held its breath, Layla pushed forward. What she did next would save his life, and what he whispered to her afterward left her in tears. The recycled air of the cabin hung heavy, thick with the drowsy hum of the engines and the murmurs of 200 strangers crammed into a metal tube hurtling across the sky. 12-year-old Layla Green, small for her age and clutching a worn paperback, felt the familiar vibration against her window seat. She was on her way to visit her aunt in a neighboring state, a rare treat that felt monumental. Her grandmother, working double shifts at the nursing home, had saved diligently for this ticket, an escape from the cramped, often shadowed streets of their inner-city neighborhood. Layla, her braids neatly tied back, watched the patchwork of clouds drift by, lost in the fictional world of her book, a temporary shield against the unspoken judgments she often felt in public spaces. The first sign of trouble was a faint cough, dismissed by most as an ordinary throat clearing. Then came a louder, rasping choke from a few rows ahead. A man in an expensive-looking suit, a pristine white shirt, and a silk tie slumped suddenly in his seat, his head lolling against the window. A ripple of discomfort, then alarm, spread through the immediate vicinity. A woman shrieked, a sharp, piercing sound that cut through the cabin's drone. Panic, like a fast-spreading contagion, began to infect the air. Flight attendants, initially composed, rushed forward, their practiced smiles replaced by expressions of urgent concern. "Is there a doctor on board?" one of them, a woman with a tightly pulled back bun, called out, her voice straining above the growing commotion. The man, Mr. Thomas Bellamy, a titan in the pharmaceutical industry known for his philanthropy and stern demeanor, was now a pale, breathless figure. His eyes were wide and unfocused, a thin line of spittle at the corner of his mouth. Passengers craned their necks, whispers escalating into a cacophony of fear and speculation. No one responded to the call for a doctor. The flight attendants, trained in emergency procedures but clearly overwhelmed by the severity of the situation, fumbled with an oxygen mask. It was evident this was beyond standard protocol. Layla's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the rising tide of fear. She remembered the intensive first aid training she'd received at the charity summer camp last year. It wasn't just a few lessons, it was weeks of rigorous practice, of learning to recognize symptoms, to act decisively, to administer CPR. Her instructor, a retired paramedic with a no-nonsense attitude, had instilled in her a deep sense of responsibility and capability. "When everyone else is panicking," he'd always said, "that's when you step up." She unbuckled her seatbelt, her small frame propelled by an instinct stronger than her fear. "I know what to do," she called out, her voice surprisingly clear. Cutting through the din, she started to push past the passengers in her row, her gaze fixed on the slumped man. A heavy hand immediately landed on her shoulder, pulling her back. "Honey, sit down," a middle-aged man in the aisle seat said, his tone dismissive, laced with a patronizing authority. He didn't even turn to look at her, his eyes still fixed on the unfolding drama at the front. "This is for adults." Another passenger, a woman with heavily made-up eyes, scoffed. A child. What could she possibly know? Her gaze swept over Layla, taking in her simple clothes, her braids, her young face, and landed with a distinct lack of belief. It was a glance that carried a weight beyond mere doubt about her age. It was a silent, cutting judgment that dismissed her entirely, before she'd even had a chance to speak. It was the kind of look Layla knew well from her neighborhood, the kind that saw poverty and color before it saw potential or intellect. Layla ignored them, her jaw set. She knew the man was dying. Every second counted. She wriggled past the man's arm, slipping into the aisle. The flight attendant with the bun, noticing her approach, blocked her path, her expression stern. "Child, please return to your seat. We are handling this." Her voice was firm, yet her eyes darted nervously towards the unresponsive millionaire, betraying her own anxiety. "He needs CP," Layla insisted, her voice rising, edged with desperation. "I learned it. I can help him." A passenger, a burly man with a red face, snorted. "CPR from a kid." He laughed, a short, derisive bark that made several heads turn. "This isn't a game, little girl." His tone was heavy with ridicule, his eyes narrowing as if Layla were an impertinent nuisance rather than a potential rescuer. His words, though directed at her age, carried an undercurrent of skepticism that seemed to extend beyond just her youth, hinting at a deeper bias against the unexpected source of expertise. The flight attendant, flustered, tried to gently usher Layla back. "Sweetheart, it's going to be all right. Our crew is trained." But her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the oxygen mask on Mr. Bellamy's face, which was now turning a faint shade of blue. The urgency in Layla's voice, the raw, unadulterated knowledge she was trying to convey, was drowned out by the collective disbelief and growing panic. Layla saw a man in a seat across the aisle quickly pull out his phone. Holding it up, the camera lens pointed directly at the commotion. His face was a mask of morbid curiosity, ready to capture the spectacle of a man dying, perhaps, or the unfolding chaos. He wasn't offering help, just documenting. This only fueled Layla's determination. She couldn't let him die, not when she knew how to help. She ducked under the flight attendant's arm, her small body surprisingly agile. She reached Mr. Bellamy, her hands already moving to assess his breathing. Her fingers found his wrist, searching for a pulse. Nothing. Her eyes met those of the flight attendant, pleading. "He's not breathing. He has no pulse. We need to start compressions now." Another flight attendant arrived, breathless, carrying a defibrillator. But the primary attendant seemed paralyzed by indecision, torn between protocol and the desperate plea of a child. The murmurs of the passengers grew louder, some urging the attendants to do something, others clearly dismissing Layla's insistent cries. "Just let the professionals handle it." Someone muttered loudly, "Don't let a child interfere." The words stung Layla more than any physical push. It wasn't just disbelief in her abilities. It was a complete erasure of her presence, her knowledge, her very being in a moment of crisis. The weight of their skepticism, their quick dismissal of a young black girl, felt like a physical blow. Her face burned, but her resolve hardened. This wasn't about her feelings, it was about the man dying before their eyes. She had to act, regardless of their silent judgments or open ridicule. She took a deep breath, steeling herself, and without waiting for permission, she knelt beside Mr. Bellamy, positioning her hands. The memory of the charity summer camp, and particularly the stern, unwavering gaze of Mr. Henderson, her first aid instructor, flooded Layla's mind as her hands instinctively found the correct position on Mr. Bellamy's chest. Mr. Henderson, a man whose skin was as dark as hers but whose eyes held the weary wisdom of years spent navigating systems that often underestimated him, had been more than just a teacher. He had been a mentor, a mirror reflecting a truth Layla often struggled to accept, that her capabilities were not defined by the narrow perceptions of others. The camp itself was a lifeline, a haven for children from low-income communities, funded by anonymous donors and run by volunteers who believed in unlocking potential often overlooked. Layla had arrived there feeling invisible, a shadow flitting through the edges of a world that seemed too big, too bright, and too quick to dismiss her. She remembered the incident distinctly, the one that had solidified her silent resolve. It was during a school field trip to a local science museum. When she was only 10, she had excitedly pointed out a factual error in one of the exhibit's placards to her teacher. Mrs. Davis, a kind but often overwhelmed woman, Layla, a voracious reader, had stumbled upon the correct information in a library book just the week before. Mrs. Davis, in front of the entire class and a handful of other parents, had patted Layla's head with a dismissive chuckle. "That's sweet, Layla, but I'm sure the museum knows what they're doing. Why don't you just enjoy the dinosaurs?" The laughter that rippled through the group, not malicious, but condescending, had burned a searing mark on Layla's spirit. It wasn't just that she was wrong, it was that her input, her intellectual curiosity, was immediately trivialized because she was a child, and more profoundly, because of the unspoken assumptions that often trailed children like her from her neighborhood. The implication was clear: her world, her background, did not equip her with knowledge that could challenge established authority. She was just a little black girl from the other side of town, not someone whose intellect could be taken seriously. That day, Layla had learned a painful lesson: speaking up, even when armed with truth, could invite ridicule and dismissive contempt. She had retreated into herself, finding solace and validation in books, in quiet observation, and eventually in the disciplined learning at the summer camp. Mr. Henderson had seen through her quiet exterior. He recognized the sharp mind, the deep empathy, and the untapped potential. He had pushed her harder than the other children in the first aid course, not out of cruelty, but out of a fierce belief in her. "Layla," he'd said one afternoon, his voice low and gravelly as they practiced rescue breathing on a mannequin. "When you look like us, child, you gotta be twice as good to get half the credit. And sometimes, you gotta be 10 times as good to even be seen." His words, delivered with a directness that both wounded and empowered, had resonated deeply. He had spoken of systemic biases, of how the world often imposed limitations based on skin color, economic status, or simply age. He taught them that competency was their armor, and action, their most potent weapon against such prejudice. He had recounted stories of his own career as a paramedic, the skeptical glances, the assumptions that he was less qualified or less capable, simply because of his race. He had emphasized that in emergency situations, there was no room for doubt or hesitation based on superficial judgments. Life doesn't care what you look like or how old you are. He'd drill into them. It just cares if you know and if you do. He made them practice CPR until their arms ached, until the rhythm was etched into their muscle memory, until they could perform it flawlessly even under simulated stress. He had demanded not just proficiency, but an unshakable confidence in their own abilities. Layla recalled one particular simulation where she had hesitated for a split second, overwhelmed by the pressure of the exercise. When another child had doubted her timing, Mr. Henderson had stopped the drill immediately. "Layla," he'd said, his voice quiet but firm, "that hesitation could cost a life. Your knowledge is yours. Your skill is earned. You don't ask for permission to save someone. You just do it." That moment had been a crucible for her. It had forged a quiet determination within her, a refusal to let the dismissive judgments of others paralyze her in a moment of true need. Now, on the plane, the echoes of those lessons reverberated in her ears. The faces of the passengers, their expressions ranging from disbelief to outright disdain, mirrored the dismissive chuckle of Mrs. Davis and the condescending laughter at the museum, the flight attendant's hesitant posture, the burly man's snorts of derision. It was all the same pattern. A societal script that sought to confine her, to limit her potential based on irrelevant markers. But Mr. Henderson's words, his steady gaze, transcended the present humiliation. They were a shield, a silent injunction to act, to push past the noise of doubt and prejudice. She would not be silenced. She would not let the life draining from Mr. Bellamy be another casualty of someone else's narrow-mindedness. This wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about honoring the trust Mr. Henderson had placed in her, about validating the weeks of painstaking effort she had put into learning these life-saving skills. It was about a deeper moral imperative that outweighed any personal embarrassment or public scorn. The man's life hung in the balance, and she, Layla Green, knew how to save it. She had to. and as her hands locked into place, she began the first compression, the rhythm of Mr. Henderson's instruction, a powerful, urgent mantra in her mind. The news of the mid-air rescue spread with the velocity of wildfire. A shaky video, filmed by the passenger who had earlier recorded the commotion, went viral, showing a small, determined figure, Layla Green, tirelessly performing CPR on a motionless man while adults stood by, seemingly bewildered. It captured the dramatic moment Mr. Bellamy gasped his first breath, a collective sigh of relief sweeping through the cabin, followed by the hesitant, then surging applause. The video ended abruptly as paramedics boarded the plane upon landing, whisking Mr. Bellamy away. Layla, a small, peripheral figure in the whirlwind of activity, for a brief, intoxicating moment. Layla was a hero. Her face, shy and earnest, appeared on local news channels. Reporters flocked to her grandmother's modest apartment, eager to capture the story of the little lifesaver. But the glow of public admiration, like a fleeting sparkler, quickly began to dim, leaving behind the dull ash of reality. The initial flurry of positive attention faded, replaced by a more insidious, pervasive form of scrutiny. Layla found that while the overt ridicule from the plane had ceased, it had morphed into something subtler, more insidious. The whispers now followed her in school hallways, not of praise, but of questioning. Is it true she actually did all that? She's just a kid. How could she really know? The skepticism, a quiet venom, began to seep into her daily life. At school, teachers who had once offered encouraging smiles now regarded her with a new, unsettling caution. Her English teacher, Mrs. Albright, notorious for her strict adherence to curriculum, subtly increased the difficulty of Layla's assignments, often commenting, "I'm sure someone as gifted as you, Layla, won't have any trouble with this advanced material." The tone was ostensibly complimentary, but the underlying message felt like a challenge, a test to see if her intelligence truly matched the sudden spotlight. Other students, particularly those who had once dismissed her as unremarkable, now eyed her with a mixture of resentment and distant awe. Some openly mocked her quiet demeanor, suggesting she was too good for them, or that she was putting on an act. The worst came from the parents of her classmates at the annual school picnic, usually a relaxed affair. Layla found herself standing alone, observing from a distance. The usual friendly chatter of mothers, often discussing their children's achievements, would abruptly cease or pivot awkwardly when Layla approached. One afternoon, while walking home, she overheard two mothers talking at the bus stop, their voices hushed but clear. "That Layla girl, she's a bit much, isn't she?" one woman murmured. "All that attention seems a bit manufactured. Somehow, like they're trying to make a statement." The other woman nodded knowingly. "You know how it is. They always highlight these stories. Makes for good The implication hung heavy in the air. Her heroism was not genuine, but a staged performance, a narrative constructed for external validation, fueled by unspoken assumptions about her background and race. Layla's grandmother, a woman who had lived long enough to recognize the insidious nature of systemic bias, tried to shield her. She emphasized Layla's resilience, reminded her of Mr. Henderson's words, and encouraged her to focus on her studies, on what she knew to be true about herself. But even her grandmother's protective aura couldn't completely deflect the constant, low-level hum of judgment. The media, initially enthusiastic, soon began to seek out more sensational angles. A local talk show invited her for an interview, but instead of focusing on her medical knowledge or quick thinking, the host kept probing about her neighborhood, her family's financial struggles, and how unlikely it was for someone from her background to possess such skills. The questions felt like thinly veiled attempts to sensationalize her poverty, to frame her extraordinary act not as a testament to her inherent ability, but as a stark contrast to her humble origins. The segment was less about her heroism and more about portraying her as a statistical anomaly, a token of inspiration rather than a person of genuine competence. Layla felt a knot of shame tighten in her stomach. It was as if her ability was only remarkable because of where she came from, not because of what she did. The most cutting encounters were in public places, away from the controlled environment of school or home. At the grocery store, she would sometimes catch people whispering, pointing. One elderly woman, after recognizing her from the news, approached her with a saccharine smile. "You're that little girl from the plane. Aren't you so brave? It's truly amazing what some of you can do. Isn't it against all odds?" The words, meant as praise, felt like a backhanded compliment, the "some of you" dripping with condescension, a stark reminder that her achievement was viewed through a racial and socio-economic lens. It wasn't Layla who saved a man. It was a little black girl from the inner city who saved a rich white man. The narrative was subtly, but powerfully, being reshaped around her, shrinking her personal triumph into a socio-political talking point. Layla began to withdraw. She spent more time in her room, reading, revisiting her medical textbooks, finding solace in the objective facts and predictable outcomes of medical procedures. She avoided eye contact in crowded places, preferring to blend into the background, to become invisible again. The confident girl who had bravely stepped forward on the plane was slowly being chipped away by the constant, subtle erosion of public doubt and systemic underestimation. The initial thrill of being a hero had been replaced by the quiet burden of being a spectacle. Her identity reduced to a set of stereotypes. The world seemed to be telling her, in 1,000 small ways, that her extraordinary act was an exception, not a reflection of what someone like her was truly capable of. It was a constant reminder that her place in the world was still, fundamentally, defined by their perceptions, not her actions. The quiet retreat Layla sought in the factual certainty of her medical books offered a fragile shield against the constant barrage of subtle judgment. She spent hours poring over diagrams of the human anatomy, memorizing drug interactions, and dissecting case studies of complex medical emergencies. Here, in the crisp pages of her textbooks, knowledge was pure, unbiased, and irrefutable. It was a stark contrast to the shifting, subjective landscape of public opinion that now defined her life. Yet, even within the confines of her quiet studies, the echoes of doubt pursued her, the unspoken challenge of her increased school workload, the whispers at the grocery store. They were all constant reminders that her competence was perpetually under review, her accomplishments scrutinized through a lens of ingrained prejudice. A mandatory school health fair loomed on the horizon, a public exhibition where students were to present research on various wellness topics. Layla initially dreaded it, the thought of standing before another audience, dissecting her newfound public persona, filled her with a familiar dread. She considered choosing a simple, uncontroversial topic, something that would allow her to blend back into the background, to avoid any further scrutiny. But as she flipped through the pages of her advanced CPR manual, a stubborn defiance began to stir within her. This knowledge, hard-won and proven, was hers. Why should she shrink from demonstrating it? She decided to present on emergency cardiac arrest, focusing on the critical importance of early CPR and the proper techniques. She painstakingly prepared a detailed poster board, complete with anatomical drawings, flowcharts, and even a small mannequin for demonstration. Her presentation was comprehensive, precise, and rooted in the very principles Mr. Henderson had drilled into her. On the day of the fair, the school gymnasium buzzed with nervous energy and the low hum of student chatter. Layla stood beside her display, her hands clasped tightly, observing the streams of parents, teachers, and students drifting through the aisles. Her turn to present to the rotating panel of judges, comprised of teachers and a few volunteer parents, arrived. Mrs. Albright, her English teacher, was on the panel, her expression unreadable. "All right, Layla," Mrs. Albright began, her tone polite but detached. "Your topic is quite ambitious. Emergency cardiac arrest. You have, of course, some personal experience with this, don't you?" The last sentence was delivered with a slight tilt of her head, a barely perceptible curve of her lips that suggested a deeper, unstated skepticism. It wasn't a question of fact, but a subtle insinuation that Layla's knowledge was anecdotal, perhaps even accidental, rather than genuinely learned. A few of the parent judges exchanged quick glances. Layla felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the urge to retreat, to mumble her way through the presentation. But then she remembered Mr. Henderson's gravelly voice. Your knowledge is yours. Your skill is earned. You don't ask for permission to save someone. You just do it. She looked at her carefully constructed poster, at the factual, undeniable science laid out before her. This was her truth. Yes, Mrs. Albright, Layla replied, her voice steadier than she expected. I do have personal experience, but my presentation isn't based solely on that. It's based on extensive study of medical protocols and techniques, which I learned and practiced rigorously. She paused, making eye contact with each judge, her gaze unwavering. I will demonstrate the correct hand placement and compression depth for adult CPR, as outlined by the American Heart Association guidelines. She moved to the mannequin, her movements fluid and confident. She explained each step with a clarity that belied her age, citing precise anatomical landmarks and the physiological reasons behind each action. She didn't just recite facts, she understood them, and her passion for the subject shone through. She spoke about the difference between agonal breathing and true respiratory arrest, the importance of chest recoil, and the chain of survival. She even corrected a minor factual error on one of the judge's worksheets, something about the rate of compressions, doing so politely but firmly, citing the most recent guidelines. A silence fell over the small group of judges. Mrs. Albright's placid expression wavered, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. The parent judges, initially skeptical, now leaned in, genuinely listening. When Layla finished, the air was thick with the unexpected weight of her detailed expertise. That was comprehensive. Layla, Mrs. Albright said, her voice now a little softer, less guarded. She still looked a little uncomfortable, as if Layla had defied an unspoken expectation. Then a voice from the back of the small crowd gathered to watch her presentation spoke up. It was Michael, a quiet boy from her history class, who had been on the same flight as Layla. He had been a few rows behind her, close enough to witness the entire unfolding drama with Mr. Bellamy, including the passengers' dismissive reactions. He was often overlooked. A boy who preferred observing to speaking. She's not just talking about it, Michael said, his voice surprisingly strong. Drawing the attention of the judges, she did it. I was on the plane. Everyone else was freaking out. And the flight attendants, they didn't know what to do, but Layla, she just went straight to him. And she kept going, even when people were telling her to sit down, saying she was just a kid. He looked directly at Mrs. Albright. She saved that man. She knows what she's talking about. Michael's words, simple and direct, were not a grand defense, but a quiet, irrefutable statement of eyewitness truth. They cut through the lingering skepticism, grounding Layla's intellectual demonstration in the stark reality of her heroism. Mrs. Albright cleared her throat, her gaze shifting uncomfortably from Layla to Michael, then back again. The other judges looked thoughtful, some nodding slowly. Layla felt a surge of something she hadn't anticipated, not just validation, but a quiet strength. Michael's unprompted support, coming from someone who had witnessed her humiliation and her resolve, was a powerful affirmation. It wasn't a revolution, but it was a crack in the wall of doubt that had been steadily closing around her. It was her first conscious act of resistance, not through defiance or anger, but through the undeniable power of her knowledge, reinforced by an unexpected, authentic witness. The subtle shift in the room, the dawning acknowledgement in the judge's eyes, felt like a small, hard-won victory. The silence that followed was no longer one of judgment, but of consideration. Months had passed since the mid-air incident, each one adding another layer to the subtle, oppressive cloak of scrutiny Layla found herself draped in. The initial media frenzy had long since dissipated, replaced by the mundane rhythm of school and the lingering discomfort of being perpetually the girl from the plane. While the health fair had offered a momentary reprieve, the prevailing narrative still subtly framed her as an improbable anomaly. A flash in the pan rather than a testament to genuine skill, the subtle biases were a constant. Corrosive hum, telling her, in 1,000 small ways, that her extraordinary act was an exception, not a reflection of what someone like her was truly capable of. The annual Community Heroes Gala, hosted by the city's philanthropic elite, felt like a public execution in slow motion. Layla had been invited, an afterthought, perhaps, added to the roster of police officers, firefighters, and seasoned medical professionals being honored. Her grandmother, beaming with pride, had insisted she attend, despite Layla's deep reluctance. The grand ballroom shimmered with crystal and silk, the air thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the drone of polite conversation. Layla, uncomfortable in her borrowed dress, felt every eye on her, not with admiration, but with a familiar, questioning gaze. She saw Mrs. Albright, her English teacher, among the attendees, exchanging a knowing glance with another parent who had been at the health fair. Layla felt a knot of familiar anxiety tighten in her stomach. The master of ceremonies. A popular local news anchor moved through the list of honorees, each presented with a gleaming plaque and a round of respectable applause. Layla's turn was announced with a hesitant, almost apologetic tone, her name trailing after a lengthy introduction about the unforeseen circumstances of the plane incident. As she walked to the stage, the applause was noticeably thinner. Interspersed with a few polite coughs, the cameraman from the viral video, now a local reporter, was at the back, his lens fixed on her, ready to capture the moment of a child receiving an adult accolade. Just as the news anchor began to speak about her brave, if unconventional, intervention, a sudden hush fell over the room. The grand doors at the back of the ballroom swung open, and Mr. Thomas Bellamy, the millionaire she had saved, walked in. He was no longer the pale, breathless man from the plane, dressed in a sharp suit. His stride was firm, his eyes clear and resolute. A collective gasp rippled through the attendees. His appearance was unexpected, unannounced, and instantly seized the attention of every person in the room. The news anchor faltered, momentarily speechless. Mr. Bellamy strode purposefully towards the stage. Bypassing the usual protocol, he reached the platform and took the microphone from the stunned anchor, his gaze sweeping over the crowd, then settling on Layla. His presence radiated an undeniable authority that silenced all whispers. "I apologize for the dramatic entrance." Mr. Bellamy's voice boomed, clear and strong, resonating through the ballroom. "But I felt it was imperative that I be here tonight, not just as an honoree, but as a witness to true heroism, and unfortunately, a witness to the subtle biases that often overshadow it." He turned to Layla, a profound respect in his eyes. "Layla Green, you saved my life. And you did it with a level of skill and composure that surpassed every trained adult on that plane." His words were a direct, undeniable counterpoint to every doubt, every dismissive glance Layla had ever received. He was validating her, not as a child who got lucky, but as a competent, trained individual. He then turned back to the audience, his gaze hardening. "I've seen the whispers. I've read the articles. The questions about how a 12-year-old girl from a disadvantaged background could possibly possess such critical skills." A collective shiver went through the room. Heads turned towards Mrs. Albright, whose face had gone pale. The man who had filmed the video, now focused intently, adjusted his camera, sensing the shift in the narrative. "Let me tell you how." Mr. Bellamy continued, his voice rising, a powerful indictment of their quiet prejudice. Layla didn't stumble into this knowledge. She earned it. She was trained at the Second Chances Summer Camp, a charity program dedicated to empowering underserved youth with life-saving skills. A program, I might add, that I have been a quiet, anonymous donor to for years. A wave of astonished murmurs swept through the room. The irony was palpable. The very man whose life Layla had saved, the wealthy philanthropist, was revealing that his own charitable contributions had inadvertently equipped her with the means to rescue him. The evidence was undeniable, the connection irrefutable. It was a complete dismantling of the unlikely hero narrative. It wasn't luck, it was a profound, almost fated, alignment of circumstances rooted in purposeful, systematic support. Mr. Bellamy extended a hand to Layla, his expression warm. "Come closer." Layla, tears welling in her eyes, stepped forward. He leaned down, his voice dropping to a whisper, audible only to her amidst the stunned silence of the room. "I know who you are." "Layla," he murmured, his eyes twinkling with a shared, profound secret. "And I know about Mr. Henderson. He sends his regards. He told me about the best student he ever had, the one who never gave up, even when others doubted her." A tear escaped Layla's eye, tracing a hot path down her cheek. It wasn't just the public vindication, or the confirmation of her mentor's pride. It was the sudden, overwhelming realization that her journey, her hidden struggles, her quiet pursuit of knowledge, had been seen, validated, and directly connected to the very source of her life-saving skill, a connection she could never have imagined. This millionaire, a symbol of the world that had so easily dismissed her, now stood as her fiercest champion, revealing a tapestry of intertwined destinies that brought her quiet endurance to a dramatic, public crescendo. The single tear became a stream, a release of months of unspoken hurt and silent defiance. The camera flashed, capturing the raw, emotional moment, a powerful counter-narrative to the previous narrative of doubt. The truth, finally, had a champion. The revelation from Mr. Bellamy ripped through the opulent ballroom like a sudden, cleansing gale, sweeping away the stifling atmosphere of polite skepticism and replacing it with stunned silence. Then a wave of astonished murmurs. The live feed from the event, broadcast by the local news channel, instantly shifted from a dry awards ceremony to a dramatic expose. Mr. Bellamy's unwavering testimony, delivered with the gravitas of a man who had faced death and returned, was an irrefutable indictment of the subtle biases that had plagued Layla. The most immediate consequence was visible on the faces of those who had quietly, or overtly, doubted Layla. Mrs. Albright, her English teacher, who had subtly challenged Layla's intellect and given her advanced assignments as a test, visibly recoiled, her face draining of color. Her eyes darted around the room, as if seeking an escape from the weight of Mr. Bellamy's gaze. The burly man from the plane, who had scoffed at Layla's CPR knowledge, was also among the guests, having been recognized for his civic contributions in another context. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, avoiding eye contact, a faint flush creeping up his neck. The woman with the heavily made-up eyes, who had dismissed Layla as just a child on the flight, clutched her handbag, her expression a mixture of embarrassment and dawning shame. News reporters, initially poised to capture a standard awards speech, scrambled to adjust their angles, their cameramen zooming in on the expressions of the shocked attendees. The man who had filmed the viral video, now working for a legitimate news outlet, was seen nodding emphatically, his earlier footage now gaining a powerful, undeniable context. The community's response was swift and multifaceted. Within hours of Mr. Bellamy's speech going viral, the school district issued a formal statement. It was carefully worded, initially focusing on the pride they felt for Layla's heroism. However, as public pressure mounted, fueled by social media outrage and the now viral clip of Mr. Bellamy's powerful defense, the statement evolved. It then acknowledged the unintended challenges Layla had faced and announced an internal review of certain staff interactions. The following Monday, a grim-faced Mrs. Albright was noticeably absent from Layla's English class. Whispers flew through the school. By Tuesday, it was confirmed Mrs. Albright had been placed on administrative leave, pending an investigation into her professional conduct and pedagogical practices. While the official reason remained vague, the implication was clear: her subtle, yet pervasive. Skepticism towards Layla had been publicly exposed and was now under official scrutiny. It was a clear signal that the school, eager to mitigate public backlash, was taking swift action. Beyond the institutional response, the grassroots reaction was even more profound. Layla's neighborhood, often overlooked and marginalized, swelled with a fierce, protective pride. Suddenly, Layla wasn't just a local girl, she was a symbol. Murals began to appear on the walls of local businesses, depicting a young girl in a superhero pose, her hands outstretched in a life-saving gesture. Community leaders, who had previously offered only platitudes, now spoke with fervent conviction about the need to invest in programs like second chances, championing the untapped potential within their own communities. The parents who had whispered at the bus stop, the elderly woman at the grocery store, many of them suddenly found themselves on the defensive. Some offered awkward, belated apologies to Layla's grandmother, attempting to backtrack on their earlier biased remarks. Others, shamed by the public spotlight, simply avoided eye contact. The weight of collective judgment, once borne by Layla, now shifted to those who had perpetuated it. The media, initially focused on the sensational rescue, now pivoted to a deeper narrative about systemic bias and the importance of recognizing talent regardless of background. Op-eds appeared in major newspapers, dissecting the Layla Green phenomenon as a powerful example of how implicit bias operates. The viral video, once a simple record of a medical emergency, became a teaching tool, a stark visual representation of a child's competence being dismissed by adults, only to be dramatically vindicated by the very person she saved. Donations poured into the Second Chances summer camp, inspired by Mr. Bellamy's revelation. The camp, once quietly struggling for funding, was suddenly inundated with support, enabling it to expand its programs and reach more children like Layla. Mr. Henderson, Layla's former instructor, found himself fielding calls from national news outlets, proudly speaking of his students and the philosophy of empowerment that guided his teaching. For Layla, the shift was profound. The oppressive weight of public doubt began to lift. The quiet burden of being a spectacle morphed into the empowering realization that her story, once twisted by others, was now being told with clarity and truth. The public humiliation she had endured was being systematically dismantled, brick by painful brick. She was no longer just a little lifesaver. She was a testament to resilience, a living embodiment of the fact that competence knows no color, no age, no economic status. The path to justice was long, but the community had awakened, and a clear message was being sent: prejudice would no longer be tolerated, and overlooked heroes would finally be seen and celebrated for who they truly were. The immediate aftermath of Mr. Bellamy's revelation brought a whirlwind of change to Layla's life. The quiet shame that had coiled in her stomach for months began to unravel, replaced by a cautious, then burgeoning, sense of empowerment. She was no longer just responding to questions, she was shaping the narrative. The constant stream of reporters had shifted from probing her poverty to genuinely seeking her insights on the importance of accessible first aid training and the insidious nature of implicit bias. Layla, guided by her grandmother and supported by Mr. Henderson, began to speak publicly, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. Her first major speaking engagement was at a town hall meeting organized by local activists, eager to capitalize on the momentum of her story. She stood before a packed audience, the familiar hum of anticipation in the air. Instead of focusing on her own trauma, she chose to highlight the broader implications of her experience. She spoke of the young people in her community, the vast well of untapped talent and potential often overlooked because of systemic disadvantages and preconceived notions. "I wasn't just a kid who got lucky," Layla stated, her voice clear and resonant, amplified by the microphone. "I was a trained individual, and my training came from a place that believes in all of us, not just those who fit a certain mold. The Second Chances summer camp gave me the skills, But it also gave me something more important, the belief that I was capable, even when others doubted me. She recounted the subtle dismissals she had faced, the way her intellect was questioned, her bravery minimized. It's not just about saving a life, she concluded, her gaze sweeping across the diverse faces in the audience. It's about seeing the value in every life and the potential in every person, regardless of what they look like or where they come from. Her speech, raw and authentic, resonated deeply. Clips of it went viral on social media, shared across platforms with impassioned captions. Hashtags like #CLayla and #competence, not color began to trend, spreading her message far beyond the confines of the town hall. Public figures, celebrities, and even major corporations began to amplify her story, recognizing its power to spark conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Social media became a powerful tool for Layla. She started a modest online campaign, initially just a series of short videos she recorded with her grandmother's phone, demonstrating basic first aid techniques. She showed viewers how to perform CPR, how to use an AED, how to stop severe bleeding. Her calm demeanor, her clear explanations, and her undeniable expertise quickly gained her a substantial following. People connected with her directness and her genuine desire to empower others with life-saving knowledge. She also started a weekly live Q&A session, answering questions about emergency preparedness and sharing stories of ordinary people who had become heroes by knowing basic first aid. The Second Chances Summer Camp, now flush with donations, invited Layla to become a youth ambassador. She eagerly accepted, dedicating her weekends to visiting community centers, schools, and youth groups, advocating for comprehensive first aid education for all children. She helped design new curriculum modules, incorporating real-life scenarios that mirrored the challenges she had faced. Her personal story, now openly shared and celebrated, became the most compelling argument for the camp's mission. Layla's presence had a profound impact. Children, especially those from marginalized communities, saw in her a reflection of their own potential. They asked her about her fears, her moments of doubt, and how she pushed through. Layla spoke of the importance of self-belief, of finding mentors who saw beyond superficial judgments, and of the enduring power of knowledge. They might try to tell you who you are, she would often say, but only you get to decide that. She also collaborated with local medical professionals and community leaders to establish Layla's Lifeline, a mobile unit that offered free, hands-on first aid training in underserved neighborhoods. It was a tangible manifestation of her commitment to ensuring that no child, regardless of their zip code, would be dismissed or underestimated when it came to life-saving skills. The first few sessions were packed, parents bringing their children, eager for them to learn from the young hero. The constant visibility, while sometimes overwhelming, became a source of strength. Each speaking engagement, each viral video, each training session was an act of rebuilding, not just for herself, but for the countless others who had been silenced or overlooked. Layla was not just recounting her story, she was actively shaping a new future, one where competence, not color or circumstance, defined a person's worth. Her voice, once dismissed as a child's plea, was now a powerful instrument of change, echoing Mr. Henderson's initial lesson in a way that resonated across the entire community and beyond. The momentum Layla had generated, born from a moment of crisis and nurtured by quiet resilience, culminated in an extraordinary event. Months after the gala, the City Council, under immense public pressure and inspired by Layla's unwavering advocacy, announced a groundbreaking initiative, the Layla Green Community Health and Empowerment Act. This landmark legislation mandated universal basic first aid training for all middle school students within the city school district, funded by a newly established public-private partnership, with significant contributions from Mr. Thomas Bellamy's philanthropic foundation. Furthermore, it earmarks substantial funds for expanding community health outreach programs, including mobile units like Layla's Lifeline, ensuring that access to life-saving skills was no longer a privilege but a fundamental right for every resident. The official signing ceremony was held in the Grand Assembly Hall of the City Hall, transformed into a beacon of civic pride. The air crackled with a palpable sense of anticipation and triumph. Hundreds attended, a cross-section of the city's population, proud residents from Layla's neighborhood, influential civic leaders, medical professionals, and, notably, a visibly humbled Mrs. Albright, now reinstated to a different, non-teaching administrative role after her period of suspension, who sat quietly in the back, her face etched with thoughtful reflection. Mr. Bellamy, frail but resolute, stood beside the mayor and the council members, his hand resting gently on Layla's shoulder. He introduced her, his voice choked with emotion. This young woman not only saved my life, but she awakened our collective conscience. She showed us that heroism wears many faces, and that the greatest potential often resides where we least expect it. Layla, now 13, approached the podium, a profound stillness settling over the hall. Her small frame seemed to radiate an immense inner strength. She glanced at her grandmother, whose eyes brimmed with tears of pride, then at Mr. Henderson, who offered a subtle, encouraging nod from the front row. She saw Michael, the boy from the plane and the health fair, giving her a thumbs up. Her gaze swept over the diverse crowd, recognizing faces from her training sessions, faces from the media, faces that had once held doubt, now radiating admiration. Less than a year ago, Layla began, her voice gaining strength with each word. I stood on an airplane, desperately trying to save a man's life. And in that moment, I faced not just a medical emergency, but a wall of doubt about my age, about my background, about my ability. She paused, allowing her words to sink in. Many of you here tonight, perhaps even some of you in this very room, dismissed me. You saw a child, a black girl from a certain neighborhood, and you couldn't imagine that I possessed the knowledge or the courage to act. A ripple went through the crowd. Some shifted uncomfortably. Some lowered their gazes, acknowledging the unspoken truth of her words. This wasn't an accusation. It was a powerful, undeniable statement of fact, delivered with the quiet authority of lived experience. But what that moment truly showed me, Layla continued, her voice resonating with deep conviction, is that competence doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't check your zip code or the color of your skin. It simply is. And the only barrier to recognizing it is our own preconceived notions. She looked directly at Mrs. Albright, who met her gaze, a flicker of something akin to shame, then genuine understanding in her eyes. It was a silent acknowledgement, a subtle reconciliation. This act, the Layla Green Community Health and Empowerment Act, she said, gesturing towards the signed document on the table, is not just about me. It's about every child who has been overlooked, every community that has been underserved. It's about ensuring that the next time a life hangs in the balance, regardless of who is in need, there will be someone, perhaps a 12-year-old girl, perhaps a quiet boy, perhaps a single mother, who knows exactly what to do. Because they were given the chance to learn, she spoke of Mr. Henderson, her voice softening with gratitude, honoring his quiet wisdom and unwavering belief in her. She spoke of her grandmother, her tireless sacrifice and endless love. She spoke of Mr. Bellamy, whose act of philanthropy had set the wheels in motion, and whose courageous public testimony had shattered the prejudice. Justice, Layla declared, her voice rising to a powerful crescendo, is not just about punishing wrongdoers. It's about creating a world where every individual is seen, valued, and empowered to reach their full potential. It's about tearing down the invisible walls of prejudice and building bridges of opportunity. It's about making sure that compassion and competence always triumph over cynicism and bias. The assembly hall erupted in thunderous applause, a standing ovation that lasted for several minutes. Tears streamed down faces, not just of pride, but of profound understanding and collective catharsis. Layla had not just recounted her story, she had articulated a vision. She had transformed her personal struggle into a universal call for societal change. As the ceremony concluded, children from Second Chances and Layla's Lifeline rushed forward, holding handmade signs bearing messages of hope and empowerment. Layla was enveloped in a joyful embrace, a tangible embodiment of the community's awakening. Her quiet strength, her unyielding dedication, had not only saved a life, but had sparked a movement. She left the hall that day, not as a child who happened to be a hero, but as a visionary leader. Her clear message echoing in the hearts of all who heard it: give everyone a chance to learn, and they will show you what they are capable of, because competence knows no boundaries, and compassion knows no limits. The fight for true equality and recognition was ongoing, but Layla had laid an undeniable foundation, proving that the quiet power of one individual, fueled by knowledge and integrity, could indeed shift the world.